Imagine there is an economist who's got all necessary skills to prevent the financial crisis from happening. What happens if this economist ends up in a highly authoritarian political regime, such as in the left? Well, there's a high likelihood that his voice will not be heard. There's a high chance that he'll have no impact over the economy. On the other hand, if this economist ends up in a highly democratic country, there's a high chance that he'll get an impact over the economy. So in autocracy, the economist feels like a caged bird. The bird can fly, but his ability to fly actually is restricted by the will of its owner. On the other hand, in democracy, the economist feels like a free bird. So with this small example, I want to show that the economic fate of the country not only depends on the economic factors, but also the political regime in the country. So therefore, I study how being autocracy or democracy affects the probability of crisis in the country. Now, given this small discussion, which of these regimes do you think is more resilient to crisis? Well, common sense says that democracy. However, my research finds that this is not true. I find that on average, autocratic regimes tend to be more resilient to crisis. Now let's get back to this example again. So the bird in the wild is actually free, and that's why it's more exposed to the danger, such as weather conditions, for example. So when it's raining outside, the bird will find itself in a difficulty. So the same applies to the democracies, because in most of the cases their economy is open, they end up they're exposed to the external threats, such as financial crisis in this situation. Now, on the other hand, what happens to the bird in the cage when it's raining outside? Doesn't really matter because it's protected. Same applies to the autocracies because their governments push conservative economic policies and therefore they're more resilient to financial crisis. My thesis also finds that when the countries switch from autocracy to democracy, during the first few years of the transition, they are extremely vulnerable to financial crisis. And again, going back to the bird, these countries remind a small bird that has spent all their life in the cage and then suddenly set free. Obviously, during the first few years, months maybe, the bird finds it difficult to find its way. The same applies for the transition economies. They find difficult to embrace the economic and political changes during the first years of the transition. Therefore, I find that during the first 5 years, on average, the transition economies experience from 2 to 3 financial crises. So to wrap it up, my thesis finds that the autocracy is safer than democracy. However, by no means does my thesis suggest that autocracy is better than democracies. Now think about the birds. Despite being protected, are the birds in the cage happy? Well, probably not, because the birds are meant to fly and connect with the nature. Thanks for your attention.